are picking a data gathering method for your study, again, based on the research problem and the research objective that you're having, you may get the idea that it's a good idea to do multi-method research or mixed method research. But very often, a single method study is much more manageable. So there's you should only engage in multi-method research if that's really warranted by your research question and you can't, or research problem, and you can't break down that research problem into smaller problems that then allow a single method investigation. A single method study would pick one clearly delineated and standardized mode of data collection and conducts a study focused on this one singular method. Such studies are usually also clearly quantitative or clearly qualitative in nature, so one or the other. This is the right thing to do if there's no one specific if there's just this one specific method that seems to be suitable to achieve the objectives that you have. Example, you want to learn the prevalence of different attribution styles among middle managers in collectivist versus individualist countries, and there you just design a survey and distribute it among middle managers in several collectivist and several individualist countries. Bang! Finished. So that's straightforward. You want to know a certain thing and how it's distributed in a population. Then it's most of the time just one survey study that you're doing and you're done. A multi-method study picks two or more modes of data collection that are combined in some way. The borderlines between the two methods can be clearly defined, but sometimes also the methodology may mix components of different data gathering methods. So the borderline is probably not always as clear as you would want to. It's not mandatory but possible to mix quantitative and qualitative data collection methods in different ways. So that's something we will look at in a minute. So this multi-method approach is the right thing to do if there is no specific singular method that is suitable to accomplish the research objective that you have. For instance, your research question is to explore the dimensions of self-presentation of YouTube content creators. You first plan to analyze the content of selected YouTube content creators. Based on the different self-presentation tactics that you find there in the videos using qualitative content analysis, you create a survey to measure self-presentational motivations and strategies. And this you then distribute among a larger sample of content creators. So you do a content analysis and you do survey. Here you combine qualitative content analysis with a quantitative survey in a mixed methods design. But often, such a more complex multi-method design can be broken down into a research program of multiple studies, several parts that you can complete in a particular sequence. That has the benefit of breaking down the complex data collection in a multi-method study into a more simple and manageable single study, two single study setups with clearly defined purposes and a more straightforward methodology. This is, if it's possible, preferable over the more complex designs because there just a lot can go wrong. So the multi-method approach would be that we have a complex research question, we explore the self-presentational motives, then come to the qualitative content analysis and the conceptualization of self-presentational motives. This informs then our mapping of self-presentational motives on a theoretical scale, which motivates our quantitative survey and leads to our insights about the prevalence of self-presentational motives. But we could also simplify this by saying we have our overarching research question, and that is completed in two steps. Study 1 explores self-presentational motives. bam, that's what we do. And study 2, we map self-presentational motives and their prevalence. That's what we do and accomplish. Finished. Okay. Good. Good. So if we look at these different kinds of combining methods, mixed methods research can be subdivided into 2 types. Either that it combines research within quantitative methods, so we have several quantitative methods, or within qualitative methods, we have several qualitative methods side by side. This is probably the more common thing to encounter. An example would be a content analysis of how the Prime Minister is evaluated in the news. That would be the first component, is combined with a quantitative survey, which news programs individuals had used and what their opinion about the Prime Minister is. We can then calculate which news content which individual has actually received, because we know which programs they watched or received and what the content of those programs was, and thereby we try to predict their opinions. If we simply ask people what content they remember, that might be biased in various ways. So just knowing what they have watched and what the content of those programs were is much less risky or much more valid. A qualitative example would be that we conduct a qualitative semi-structured interview about people's views about obese persons that we then in step 2 or component 2 combine with a qualitative content analysis of depictions of obese people in various entertainment contexts. Thereby we try to draw connections between prevalent views and constructions of obesity in subjective narrations on the one hand and the cultural expressions thereof in entertainment media. A bit rarer is that we combine quantitative or qualitative methods in the same study, which is not as common. For instance, we may conduct qualitative interviews with TikTok users on their subjective experiences and practices of TikTok use, as well as the gratifications they experience from their usage. And then this provides us with a typology of practices and of experiences. And we use this typology to create a quantitative questionnaire for a quantitative survey, and that seeks to map the prevalence, the distribution of these practices and experiences among the youth in Norway. So the population of inference would be young people in Norway, and we have a sample of those to which we apply this questionnaire we built based on the typology. Okay, if we analyze how different kinds of studies can be mixed, 2 dimensions take center stage. One is the temporal order. One thing we need to decide is if we conduct a multi-method study, which one comes first. The part of the study that gets done first can provide preliminary results that may help design or specify the second component or revise the second component. So if we have quantitative first and qualitative second, usually the quantitative component is used to scan how prevalent a certain phenomenon is, and then explore the meaning or the subjective experience or whatever the everyday practices of that so-and-so prevalent phenomenon in a qualitative component. Okay, and that may allow us to expand conceptualizations and identify patterns and so on. If we go qualitative first and quantitative second, the motive is usually to use the qualitative component to build conceptualizations or typologies And those can be used to build a measurement instrument for the quantitative study, which then looks into the prevalence of the phenomenon or any correlations between variables identified as meaningful in the qualitative component. Or you can go simultaneous with the two components, but there's usually very little benefit from fielding both components simultaneously. The most frequent situation is that a phenomenon occurs only in a short period of time, like a major sports event, and then both components need to be fielded before you are even able to analyze one of them. So they can't really benefit from each other, but they can collect data that together tells you something about the phenomenon that only one of the two data sets could not. And the second dimension is priority and effort. Independent of the timing, there may be a relatively equal importance of all data gathering components, or one of them can clearly take center stage and the other has only subordinate importance. So we have situations that are mainly a qualitative study with some quantitative subordinate component, or just the other way around, or both have roughly similar priority. Okay, fine. Finally, to exemplify, I've brought with me an example of such a relatively complex mixed methods design with quantitative and qualitative components. That's a study I have conducted or am currently conducting in a long time project. First of all, I want to show you a rough map in figure 7 of this research project and its different components. It starts with looking at, so it's about crisis communication. It's about how news media report about crisis in a long-term view. It looks at historical newspaper coverage of crisis in a 235-year period. And the study starts with so-called real-world indicators. So what we did is collect statistics from the country the newspaper is published in on economic growth, political stability, and so on. So many different meaningful indicators of what has happened, major natural disasters occurring in the country, and so on. So those would be real data as one data source, mostly quantitative. Then in the second component, we use fully automated content analysis on a very large corpus of texts. So that's basically all news, all articles from the newspaper we are studying that has any crisis reference in it. That's 187,000 articles, if I remember correctly. And those are treated just by the computer. The computer will try to identify the major topics, the main actors, and so on in these articles without human intervention. And also based on this, the computer will try to find out which crisis are these articles actually concerned with. Are they concerned with some specific crisis event, for instance, like a major earthquake or a war or a pandemic? And then when we know this, like did we have any pandemics and when were they? How much coverage of pandemics in a crisis context do we have? And do we have specific events, some pandemic events that are referenced? Then we can go into a qualitative content analysis context, where we look at specific epidemics that we've identified and see how they are presented in the news coverage, how they are framed, who is blamed, what attributions are made, who gets to talk and analyze the pandemic, and so on. How much fear does the public have according to the presentation in the news? So that's where we go into qualitative analysis of specific articles we could pick because we knew which events were covered at which time. And then we try to conceptualize core dimensions of pandemic coverage and go back to quantitative content, or build a quantitative analysis, content analysis codebook based on that. And thereby we try to get a feel of how typical and how is the distribution of certain actors, of certain accusations or blames in pandemic coverage, and has that changed over time, right? In the different cases. And finally, we try to teach the computer to judge the news articles according to the same logic as the human coders did. We try to supervise the computer in what it needs to take care of, what it needs to look at to make the same kinds of coding decisions that humans made. Okay, so that's the basic setup of this quite complicated multi-method study. And to show that it's really a multi-method study and not like several studies you could just do separately, this graphic shows how exactly these different components work together and how earlier components are dependent on how the later components depend on the earlier components. For instance, relatively independently, we have the real world data, but in order to do the component where we identify specific crisis events, we need to complete this component where we subdivide the coverage into different topic areas, identify the actors, and so on. And for the final component, the semi-automated content analysis and the supervised machine learning, we need the manually coded data in order to train and cross-validate the machine learning procedure, right? And so that's how the different components work together. And here's the qualitative component that is again used to do the manual quantitative coding, which in turn is necessary for the machine learning approach. Okay? And if that's not clear enough, or that doesn't specify in each and every way what these arrows mean and how they work, this is a more area-specific look at how different procedures work together. In this case, for identifying actors that are being cited or mentioned in news coverage. So first we have named entity recognition, which is a computer algorithm or a computerized procedure that identifies potential actors, but not everything identified there is really an actor. Then we only look at actors that appear more than 5 times in a given year, because we have a lot of noise in this automated procedure. Or even look at the 1,000 top actors per phase, which we then manually classify with human coders based on a qualitative procedure and then a quantitative procedure, and then we have quantitative results. This we use for our semi-automated actor identification using machine learning, the data produced by the humans, and by my annotation is used as training data to train the classifier, and then the performance of the computer, being the classifier, is then validated against the second half of these data to probe if that coincides with the human-made decisions. And at the side, we would also build a dictionary of actors that identifies these actors just by listing which actors go in which category.